Is the world actually heading towards World War III? I'm going to give you some very unusual, divine prophetic moments that I had as I was in Europe and this war broke out between Israel and Hamas. What's particularly bothersome about this moment is you're not hearing a rational U.S. clear position. I mean, you're going to watch footage of Biden mumbling through, his meeting with Netanyahu, reading his teleprompter and half falling asleep or reading his cards. What we have right now is a need for an intercessory bombardment of heaven to keep events from veering off course. Because they're putting together a $100 billion, $200 billion additional package in Washington right now with money we don't even have. Out of a $2 trillion deficit, we're going to come up with another 100 or 200 trillion. And they're going to try to sandwich Ukraine and Israel together with a little bit of money for Taiwan and maybe a border wall or border processing money. They're going to put together an irresistible spending package. They're capitalizing on the trauma of what's happening with Israel to get the money to Ukraine because Americans are tired of putting money into that dumb war. Why am I saying this? Because as we speak, I've got this 30-year mortgage rate going up to 8%. We have people coming out that are talking nonsense to America about the economy. What's his name? Krugman comes out this week with the New York Times and says, the inflation is under control. Oh, you know what they did? They took out energy and food. So if you don't heat your house this winter, you don't drive a car, and you don't eat, inflation's under control. We're virtually on the edge of bankruptcy, and the government wants to go into war. How's that sound for a package? Well, not one front, but two. We'll go with the Middle East and we'll go with Russia. If there was ever a time, my friend, when you need to really anchor down on having a divine perspective as to what God's doing in the shaking of nations, it's now. And by the way, the Bible says it's a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time for war and a time for peace. And you need to know what time it is right now. It's time that you put your money in the safest place possible, especially in the American economy. You got to be watching this prophetic moment of divine discipline and shaking and saying, let me put my money at least where it's not shaken. That's why I'm recommending you do Birch Gold study. Go to lancewallnau.com/Birch. Read the 20-page report. Analyze silver. Analyze gold. Analyze its historic power as a store of value, and do an analysis of how you diversify to protect your own self. Those that are our age and looking at retirement, looking at the future, looking at your children, you need to think about how can you take your existing IRA, you can roll it over, you can put it in something that's safe, and it's going to be strong. You know why I'm saying gold is a wise move? Because it's where the banks are going. They're going for gold all over the world. The only banks that aren't doing that smart right now are United States banks. Isn't that interesting? They're looking at digital currency as a potential next option. No, I want you to go to lancewallnau.com/Birch and take action so that you have peace of mind. Regardless of how the shaking falls out around the world, I believe God says, according to the Bible, the silver is mine, the gold is mine, and I believe God is going to take care of his own people, and his own end-time projects. lancewallnau.com/Birch is what you need to do now. And then let's get into the world shaking. Greetings, everyone in America. I'm just back from my trip out of the country. I was in Prague and I was in Vienna. Curious enough, I was at a family affair over there, but then, of course, war breaks out. You got to cover what's happening. And while I was over there, it was interesting to me, Mercedes Sparks, co-host of today's show, that there was so little interest in speaking directly and effectively about the massacre that took place on the Gaza area. I mean, when you've got over 1,000 people, remember, it's hard to appreciate this. When 9/11 happened, we were all frozen. America was frozen. We have a country of, 350 million people, throwing numbers out there, had 2,000 died on that day. That's a small percentage of the population. Here you've got close to, 1,300 deaths that had taken place in a population that's 6 million or so Jews. So everybody knows somebody who was affected by that. And when I was in Europe, the response was rather slow and muted, as Europeans are, except for the Arab community. The pro-PLO, Hamas-oriented, they right away rose up and immediately were, it was weird because Israel hadn't even done anything yet to counterattack, and already there was indignation that they were doing anything, which shows you the bizarre mentality that's there. Now, why am I opening up this segment with a personal story like that? Because when I'm there, as sometimes happens, we have these, I don't know what you call them, synchronous moments or peculiar moments when you're doing news coverage. So I'm doing some news coverage for the United States, partially on the European response, which was muted, and then came along and said they supported Israel, but they wanted to make sure that there was understanding that this has to be according to the rules of law, almost like it's kind of a gentleman's sport. Sure, they could wrap tires around you, fill them with diesel, and ignite you on fire. They could cut off your baby's head in front of you, execute a parent in front of a child in front of a parent, but you better make sure there's proportionality and discipline in your response. You Jews better be careful about how you handle this. It's as though you have someone who is, this is a spiritual thing, is ready to be offended. You ever been around someone like that? They're just like the tripwires, right? They're waiting for you to say that one. They're already almost got an anger spirit, and they're waiting for you to justify its manifestation. So that's a lot of the pockets of the Muslim community and Arab in Europe that is vocal and on the street. You never see a protest, by the way, of conservatives or moderate Muslims, because if you're moderate or you're conservative, you're not inclined to protest anyway. That's how come they exist, but you're not seeing them on the street. Saying all that because where am I when this is breaking up? So the story's breaking out. I'm getting calls. I got to do some news coverage. I'm going to be doing it for the United States and doing it for a program I do, by the way, in Israel. I've got a program that airs over there on the U.S.-European perspective of what's happening. Okay. So Mercedes, I kid you not, I'm sitting there thinking, there's something bigger and more dangerous about this whole event than people are realizing. This has the ability to become an entanglement. The United States does not have the discipline in statecraft, the clarity in statecraft, to know how to walk that precise line that they have to walk in order to support Israel with its response and not inflame or organize the Russias and the Chinas and the Muslim countries around us, which Biden has an incredible gift, along with Blinken, his incompetent, running buddy, when it comes to organizing our enemies against us. I mean, these are like the perfect people to put the BRICS nations together, to put China and Russia together, to put China, Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia in bed together. Leave it to Biden to do that, something Trump would never do. Anyway, my wife, of course, I'm like one of those husbands that, we're supposed to be with my wife. We're here in Europe. She said, don't forget, because you're going to be busy in November. This is our anniversary celebration. So this was supposed to be our celebration of our anniversary because I had something else I have to do on the date of our anniversary. I said, absolutely, my dear. And then I'm thinking, I got to get the news in here, and I got to do it in a way that I don't lose points for the vacation time with my wife over here. So I said, let's go to a museum. Randomly, there's like 100 museums in Vienna. I'm from Prague now to Vienna and flying home. I'm saying, going to go home. We'll go home through Vienna. And while I'm there, 100 museums, I pick one. You talk about a random, that's why I talk about synchronicity, unusual events like this. I picked one. And while I'm there, I'm thinking of my notes for my broadcast, which will be on the dangers of the issue of Hamas and Israel expanding because of incompetence in the United States and its own policy, causing us to be embroiled and entangled in conflicts with larger states that we don't really have any desire to fight with, nor do they want to go to war with us right now. Just thumping rhetoric from Iran or Russia or the U.S., that's what politicians do. They don't actually want to pick the actual fight. But it can get out of control very quickly. And as I'm thinking that, I'm thinking, you know where that happened? World War I. It wasn't World War II, which was intentional. It was Hitler seeing how far he could go before he actually had to declare, okay, we're going to go to war. It was Pearl Harbor was a clear action of war. First World War was not that. It was a capricious kind of boiling pot in Eastern Europe where Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated with his wife because he was the heir of a throne in Hungary. And while he's going through Sarajevo, he is shot. And he's shot, and the incident of the shooting of an Archduke Ferdinand on his way potentially to the throne of Hungary sets in motion a domino effect that goes to Russia, goes to Germany, then because of our alliance with England, goes to England, and goes to the United States. Got United States and England and Russia and Germany. You got the World War and 100 million young dead men. And it was because it was a tinderbox looking for a cause. That's very much like what's happening now with the situation in Israel. As you've got Biden down there with 2 aircraft carriers with 10,000 sailors each on them, an 8-10, 2,000 logistics and medical, as well as 25,000 combat troops on call, potentially to be summoned. I mean, this is really, and as I'm thinking that thought, I look up and discover that where I am, the palace of the Austrian gallery, which is called the Belvedere Gallery, I look up and I realize, oh, this was actually the home of the Prince Eugene, going back in time to the 1700s, 1700s, and then 1800s, 1900s. It was actually the home of Archduke Ferdinand and his wife. On the weekend, he made the trip and was assassinated in Sarajevo. Assassinated in the tripwire incident that caused World War I. And as I sit here, those thoughts were all there as I was standing on that ground. I said, how odd is this that I picked the one place in all of Europe that illustrates the home, the man and his wife, 2 shots, both killed. And all over local passions regarding religion and geography. All over a local dispute on religion and geography. And that Serbia might not have its nation state, its Palestinian nation state, its status, if this guy is the heir. That's what caused World War I. Is that weird or what? Yeah. I mean, I'm just telling you, say what you will, and someone will go, listen, if you've got a modicum of prophetic anything in you, you got to understand something. I was just in Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles, for the dang feast. I spoke in Jerusalem to 100 nations, like 7 or 8 days before this incident. I'm there in the feast speaking. For all I know, I could have been there on the day this happened. And I got family that lives. I got a niece that lives just in the community next to Gaza. Next door, right there, Ashkelon. By the way, if you go to the Bible, this is freaky. You'll see the Philistines, which is the modern-day Palestinians. Palestine is the Philistine. The Philistinians attacking by name Gaza and Ashkelon. And this goes back to the Old Testament. It's thousands of years, which is hilarious if you think about it, because it's not like these things just happened recently. We treat it like it's like ever since the 1960s. This has been going on for 2,000 years, folks. Actually, 3,000 if you want to go back that far. But what struck me as interesting is I did not hear anyone say this until I randomly, just like the Archduke Ferdinand, assassinated, living in the residence I'm walking through as an art gallery, as I'm thinking how similar this is to World War I. Then I had this other unusual experience, Mercedes, where I'm, as I sometimes do, I come home from these trips and I'm sorting through all of this because I have an interesting audience. My audience checks in on me when things like this happen. I have a trending topic prophetic audience. It's like Well, he talks, but he said, I love the Lance rants. But it's kind of like then it goes spikes up suddenly when it's like, when it's an incident, it's kind of good in a way. They come and they want to get clarity on it. So I'm sitting down today, I'm thinking, man, Lord, this must not be. I'm a praying man. So I pray as the rabbis of my father's side of my family, going back hundreds of years, would pray. I pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Why? Because if Jerusalem is in a peace, it can create a stumbling block that has the whole world involved with conflict. And my eyes drop upon a verse, to my surprise, from 2 chapters of an Old Testament book called Haggai. On the 21st day of the 7th month, the word of the Lord came to Haggai the prophet. As God begins to prophesy about global shaking he is going to do. And when does he make this prophecy? On the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. The last day, the very day Hamas may have triggered a global conflict. We'll be right back. Hey, let's take a moment right here and talk about something. These programs are actually paid for by sponsors. And so the one thing that I always do is try to pick the sponsors that have the greatest value. Those are the ones that I myself believe in. Now, the Birch Gold Group is one of those key sponsors, and I'll tell you why. The economy is the area that I'm the most concerned about in terms of instability in the future. Do you know that right now, China and Russia and India is meeting with Saudi Arabians and South Africans to create an alternative economy, to basically crush the dollar? This is going to have a massive effect on the stock market, on real estate. It'll be a real shaking. But you don't have to be shaken, because there's a way you can protect your retirement, your 401ks, your IRAs, by connecting them in with gold. Gold is unique in history in that it's a place of stored value. In fact, those BRICS nations of Brazil and Russia, India and China, they're going to be backing themselves with, guess what? Gold. So be smart. I want you to go to lancewallnau.com/birch and get a free information kit. Get knowledge, act quickly, don't wait. And they're going to be able to help you make a great decision on what to do. Remember, that information is free with no strings attached. Do it now, lancewallnau.com/birch. Welcome back again to the next segment of the Lance Wallnau Show with Lance Wallnau. And Mercedes Sparks, you are here. You are here, and you're looking very colorful, and I want to come back. I want to talk about my theories on the assassinations and World War, but on a cheerier note, you've made the set look a little bit more harvest-friendly.
I fallified the set, Chelsea and I did. We went to Hobby Lobby and fallified it for you while you were out and about. I also just want to welcome everyone else outside of America that's watching.
Yes, I opened the show saying, for those of you that are in America, and then you pointed out, why did you say that? Well, because I just got back from Europe, and you...
Mm-hmm. But you have a lot of people that watch from other countries. I don't know if you know that, but you have a ton.
I wasn't aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Lots. Like Australia, lots in Australia, UK, South America.
If I could have presented all of the votes that I got for Trump in Canada, Australia, and in other parts of the world, he would have been elected, because I have a lot of Trump supporters.
Hey, speaking of Canada, you're going to Canada.
Speaking of Canada.
Next weekend.
Next weekend.
I think.
October 28th. I'm going to be in Ontario. Just go to lancewallnau.com/events. And I'm going to be speaking at a college. You want to go, and who knows, will there be protesters there? We don't know. But Arthur Pawlowski is going to be there, the guy that...
if he's not in jail, he will be there.
Trudeau, if he's not in jail, but Trudeau keeps trying to put him in jail. A pastor who is outspoken for the truth. October 20th, if you're in Ontario, come to the lancewallnau.com/events page and make sure you register and find out where and how to get there. All right, now, this is very important, muy importante. Chelsea, when you put that picture up, I found a picture of Archduke Ferdinand's home. I was in front of it, and I'm with my wife at the, like I said, our anniversary day, and I'm having this, there it is. Look at the mass of this place. That's half the house. The other half you can't see. And the whole thing is an art museum right now, an art gallery. So while I'm there, I'm getting ready for the broadcast in the evening that I'm going to be doing, discussing what's happening with Israel and the European response, et cetera. And that's when I say this just feels like it's a World War I scenario where a regional conflict that's very local, it can get complicated very easy. Biden is not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and he's down there with Blinken, who is equally inept. And I mean, he puts a tweet up within 20 minutes after the event takes place saying, let's have a ceasefire. Then there's such an explosion against him. He takes it down. This is the guy who's helping Biden, who can't read without half falling asleep while he's talking about it. So I guess where I want to go now is I want to talk about the day that this happened is the last day. The attack happens on the last day of an Israeli sacred feast calendar. Now, if you are a rabbi, if you are a Christian with a prophetic, which is a large number of Americans, by the way, more than you think, that believe God is saying something, we're in the last days of history. And it kind of bleeds into what you'll hear other people on on Real America's Voice and other platforms talk about the end times or the Great Awakening or the fourth turning. I mean, these things, they're all overlapping language. But what I want you to catch is the Feast of Tabernacles is one of 3 feasts in Israel that are sacred days on a calendar set by God according to like a lunar schedule. So they're extremely meticulously executed. There's a certain timeline they will always happen. And so there's a sense of a fixed relationship between the cosmos and earth in terms of the axis of time and the certain dates on which God has feasts celebrated that are a statement of God's interworks with the nations. In the beginning is the Feast of Passover, which obviously is the time the Jews exited out of Egypt and went into the Promised Land. For the Christians, it was the night in which Jesus was betrayed, and he took the blood and he said, I'm establishing a whole new contract with earth based upon my sacrifice. This is my blood which is shed for the forgiveness of sins. So Passover becomes, for the Jews, the escape from bondage from Egypt, which tells you how long the Jews have been in that territory, by the way. A lot longer than the Palestinians. And you have Jesus 2,000 years ago saying, this is the new covenant on Passover that I'm establishing. So Passover is an established, symbolic, prophetic timeline for the escape and the new beginning. Following that, 10 days later is Pentecost. Pentecost is another one of those important dates in the calendar because it's the day in which, in the Jewish culture, they would have the first harvest would begin. The barley harvest would start. And the barley harvest, the first grains of a ripening harvest, the priest would wave, and it was an important memorial for the promise. Because when you're living in an agrarian culture, if you don't have a harvest, you got a year of starvation and death. So the harvest is a significant sign of God's benediction upon you. So the harvest begins, but it was on that day that the outpouring of the Holy Spirit happens in an upper room in Jerusalem, and 2,000 souls are saved, 120 individuals were filled with the Spirit of God and spoke with a new language, a new tongue. That began the Pentecostal outpouring, out of which the church, the first century Jews, apostles were Jews. The first converts were Jews. They weren't Gentiles. They weren't even sure they were going to let the Gentiles in. Show you how Jewish this movement was. They had a debate. Their first big conference was, should we let the Gentiles in? I don't think so. They had a big fight over it. The Gentiles came in, thank God. The Jews started off on the day of Pentecost, and they went throughout the world with the Christian gospel, the Christian message. The third feast, this all ties into what's happening now, people. Why? Because it's on the last day, the great day, the wonderful crescendo of the third feast, when the devil provokes Hamas to an atrocious attack. The most outrageous, it's a hard thing to make the analogy, but 9/11 was planes going into buildings in instantaneous, death for many and a horrifying death. In the Hamas assault in Gaza, it was 1,000 different ways of executing, and now about 150 different ways of psychologically torturing and tormenting hostages. It's a far more insidious, intricate outworking of an evil, malevolent agenda with a lot more criminals involved. You had 5 pilots and co-conspirators, or 7 or 9, 9/11. In this case, you've got how many Hamas soldiers that are all willing to burn, decapitate, mutilate innocent lives? And what kind of pathology has to be in your brain to justify that kind of atrocious behavior? It has to be a hate that's steeped almost in a satanic process of psychological conditioning. I'm saying all that to say the third day of the feast, the third feast coming, the last day of the feast is the Feast of Tabernacles. It's the final day. What happens on the final day is significant. I just read to you an interesting verse. It was on the last day of the feast, a prophet named Haggai. 2 chapters in the Bible. He basically comes along during the era of Cyrus, who has been even knows from my teaching. I prophesied that Donald Trump would be a modern-day Cyrus. There are others that appear in history. Trump would fulfill that type. It's a foreigner who comes in for the sake of Israel. And Trump came in for the sake of Israel, and he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He established peace in the Arab community with the other neighbors. He took out Soleimani, the Iranian, which is part of what this is all about. Those Persian radicals want to assassinate a high-level American. Remember when I said that. I'm saying it again. They want Soleimani's revenge. To them, it's like an indignation that happened yesterday. They're wired weird. Trump took out Soleimani because he was the mastermind of Iranian terror that was responsible for the mutilating and the limbs blowing off and the killing of 600 American servicemen with special devices that he planted and he managed along the roads of America's traveling in and out of the engagement in Afghanistan and in Iraq and in Syria. So on that last day of the feast, the day of the high holy Shabbat, it's a day of rest. The Jews are away from their phones. They're away from, which is why they were attacked like this in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. The prophet speaks, chapter 2, verse 1. The prophet who rises up in the era of Cyrus to rebuke the Jewish people for not walking in God's plan for their nation. And he warns them, shaking is coming. If you do not line up with my agenda as your God over your future, shaking is coming. And listen, for the United States, we're preaching this word because shaking's already started. Why? The prophet says, God himself speaks to his people. And he says, to those that are on his work, those of you that are right now struggling along, you're doing everything you can. You're saying, look, man, Lance, preacher man, whatever. I need some encouragement right now. Well, here's a word for you. God says, take courage. Take courage. All the people that are working according to my word and according to my will, for the Spirit of God is among you. I am in your midst. I am the one that is energizing you to do my will. Do not fear. For thus says the Lord, once more in a little while, I'm going to shake all the nations and that are going to come. But that shaking is going to result in the establishment of my kingdom. It will result in the building of my house, and the latter glory of my house shall be greater than the former glory. This is a great mystery to me, Mercedes. But somehow I believe this current unfolding happening on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, as the prophet prophesied, is actually going to unfold rather so that the message of the kingdom and the message of Christ is going to gain a special new strength. I don't know how it's going to happen. But God's plan isn't that the gospel of Christ be muted, because the third Feast of Tabernacles is about the end-time harvest of nations. The third feast, the first one's about redemption. The second one is about being empowered. The third one is about the harvest at the end of the age. And it's on the celebration of the last great day of the feast, looking prophetically to God's end-time harvest of people and nations, that this incident happened. I believe God is going to have a harvest of nations and people. And you're going to live to see how this circumstance, even as it's being worked out, is going to work out for that very purpose. And then take a look at December, somewhere in December. It says the 9th month and the 24th day was the next prophecy of Haggai. If things run true to pattern, I'm expecting December to be a very interesting month. You know, I want to tell you that all of you are so important to this process of what we're doing. You see, the word that I'm giving you here is God is saying to his people that are struggling. We're going to talk about what's happening with Jim Jordan right now. We're going to talk about what's happening with Israel. We're going to talk about what's happening with Trump, with the election. We're battling for something. Those of you that are listening to me, many of you are people of faith. I want you to know, God is saying, work, for I am with you. My spirit is abiding among you. I'm going to shake things in such a way that my purpose is going to be established in the earth. I think we can be encouraged, folks. Only Christians can look at these events and see the patterns from the past, see them in the present, and weave them into the fulfillment of the Feast of Israel. Because I really believe we're watching the end time feast. It will not be interrupted. It will not be stopped. Remember what the Lord said. He said he's going to shake all the nations so that the glory comes where he wants it to go. He's going to shake things up to direct the audience where he wants it to move. And the eyes of the world are going to be upon Jesus and upon the house that God is building, the dynasty of Christ and the end time overcoming people of God. We hold that out there because it is the third feast. Satan sought to interrupt it. Do you catch that as I'm signing off today? Mercedes, Satan hit on the last day of the feast because he wants to interrupt the timing of nations coming in. He wants to interrupt, just like he did in the last election cycle, interrupt America's continuity in the world as a Gentile power with Trump leading it. Break it up and stop it. He will not succeed. This is a very high level, kind of refined prophetic analysis, but I pray that you that have ears to hear are hearing, and we're going to be back again tomorrow with part 2 on the prophetic timing of what's happening in Israel, in the United States, and among the nations. You don't want to miss it. Look forward to seeing you back.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate the world